This is a call for an uprising. Welcome to today's show. I wanted to cover Halloween. I know a lot of you have asked me to cover it, to talk about the origins of it, the satanic origins, obviously, of it, involving the traditions with trick-or-treating and all of the things that we know are traditions in America, which are all satanic, but everybody has been brainwashed into doing and accepting. Obviously, Halloween and All Hallows Eve are the days that these Satanists perform blood rituals, human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, all of these disgusting things that I talk about on this channel that they do. The holiday itself is known as Samhain, but it looks like it says Samhain, but it's Samhain. I'm going to say it just like that, Samhain. Okay? It's a 3-day fire festival in which sacrifices were given to fires for the sun god, which is a common theme that you will see amongst all of these Satanists. Sun worship, over and over. Samhain, or Halloween, All Hallows Eve, is a festival for the dead. Now, I exposed the Beltane on this channel months ago. The Beltane is the festival for the living. The Beltane is when the veil is at its second thinnest. That's what they believe. And Halloween is when the veil is at its thinnest. So these dates are significant to them because when they perform their rituals, their bloodletting rituals, blood sacrifice, I should say, rituals, and they commit these heinous acts by sacrificing humans, sacrificing animals to Satan, the veil is thin so they can invoke more demons. And they believe that their, the wishes that they have a better chance of being granted because of how thin the veil is, and they can communicate better with the dead. So there's a slew of traditions that occur during this period from October 29th to the 31st. I talked about October 13th being the first day that this all really starts. This is the preparation period from the 13th to the 31st. Obviously, there's significance behind the number 13, and also 31 backwards is 13. We know how they operate with the law of reversals. So Samhain is the Celtic lord of the dead, and it's considered a stag god. A stag god in the occult is always a reference to the ancient male god Nimrod. And if you don't remember, Nimrod is known in scripture for being the one who is really the leader of building the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel, which represents the New World Order. That is the reason that God divided the nations and changed up the languages. Nimrod was somebody who was working towards a New World Order. Thus, we see the worship of Nimrod all the time from these Satanists because they worship Nimrod. Now, he was depicted with one horn or multiple horns appearing as antlers, just like Moloch. We see the multiple horns on the head, not just of the Baphomet, who obviously has horns, but we see that even in American Horror Story, where I pointed out Lady Gaga's character with the horns on her head. Now, most of you know of Stonehenge, and if you actually see many Stonehenges around the world, we all know of the one infamous Stonehenge, but lots of towns actually have small replicas of this built. Now, this is where the Druids would go, and they would worship their quote-unquote stag god on the occultic holidays, such as the Beltane, such as Halloween and All Hallows Eve. They performed sacrifices at these sites. Ritual, barbaric sacrifices. Many of them are too graphic for me to speak of, but the sacrifices are known to involve the draining of blood and the taking out of organs from these people they sacrifice, and even the eating of the heart. Now, Druids would gather at Stonehenge on Samhain with gourds and pumpkins. So that's where the tie-in comes from, the gourds and pumpkins, which they used to call corpse candles. And they would fill them with human fat taken from previous sacrifices given to the gods. They'd also bring cauldrons and light them on fire as well, warming them up for the sacrificial ceremony that they would be performing. Now, the trick-or-treat and the knocking on the door and for trick-or-treat. Now, I've talked about it in other videos. There's multiple meanings behind it. But what the Druids would do is they would bang on the doors of local people, and they would yell trick-or-treat to see if the lord of the home or the lord of the manor would provide a treat. A treat would be one of the servants of the household to be given up for sacrifice on that night. Yes, this is how sick it is. The reward for the treat would be one of the pumpkins filled with human fat, and they would light it so that everyone within the house was protected from the demons that they were summoning on Samhain. If you didn't give up an offering, you would get a 6-pointed star inside of a circle, a hexagram painted with blood on your front door. This would be an attractive force for the demons, and the people inside would be plagued with the demonic curse during this period, which is the Samhain period, which is All Hallows Eve and Halloween leading up to November 1st and sunrise that day. Another theory is that people would leave treats of food and candies outside for the demonic spirits as they traveled the material world on Halloween Day, October 31st. The treats would keep the evil spirits at bay from plaguing the household. The human sacrifices would be gathered up and lined up as the druids would throw apples into the cauldrons and give the humans a chance to pull the apples out with their teeth, hence bobbing for apples, which is a famous tradition on Halloween, right? We hear about the bobbing for apples. Well, that's where it comes from. The cauldrons were boiling hot, and the people who got the apples with their teeth then had a chance to obtain freedom. Some went for the chance and could be burned with permanent damage to their eyes because of how hot the water was. And those who did not get the apple on the first try were beheaded immediately, while those who avoided the challenge will be sacrificed in a fiery death. So these are the things that go on with these Satanists. These are the traditions that we have in America specifically, because I've been in other countries and they do not celebrate Halloween. Some do, but it's really become this American tradition. And it's actually, Americans love Halloween, probably more so than any other of these pagan holidays. Americans are obsessed with it. And if you're someone who doesn't live in America, I'll tell you right now, people in this country are beyond obsessed with this holiday. Now, those who didn't get the apple, like I said, would be beheaded, but then the others would be taken to the Wicker Man. Now, I talked about the festival, the Burning Man festival that goes on out in the desert where they burn this giant Wicker Man. If you've ever seen the movie The Wicker Man, if you're old enough to watch it or see it, this is actually what they did. They would offer human sacrifices inside of this giant Wicker Man, and they would burn it, and it would be a sacrifice to the gods. And this again goes back to Nimrod. It goes back to satanic worship. And the ceremony you see at the Burning Man is the exact same ceremony. It's a copy of it, even though people go there, they're oblivious to what's going on, and people think it's some type of artistic expression. Now, another one of the traditions on Halloween is dressing up in costumes. It used to be called guising. This came about because the veil between the spiritual world and physical world is its thinnest, like I said earlier, and the departed souls can come visit their loved ones, they believe, during this period. The lit flames in the sacrificial areas are a beacon for the spirits to find and enter into our world. They believe this could filter out the evil spirits by dressing up in costumes that they could scare away evil spirits. So the Druid priests would wear scary clothing to keep them away. Now, I talked about in other videos about how important Halloween was to them and how high the kidnapping rate used to be before, obviously, abortions, which is now their way of getting blood sacrifice and ritual sacrifice whenever they want, because so more and more people have been convinced to perform abortions and get abortions, and they don't even think that they're killing or doing anything because they've dumbed down society so much that they don't. But on this day, having children be the ones that dress up and go door to door, okay, because when we're talking about Druids doing it, we're talking about adults, right? We're talking about adults who are doing it to scare away evil demons. Halloween, obviously, is targeted at children. Children are the ones who really dress up. Once you hit a certain age, people stop trick-or-treating. I know now it's becoming popular again because kids go to parties now and dress up or go out to the bar or whatever they do. I have no idea, really. But I know that it's become popular again. I know when I was young, it wasn't. Once you got to a certain age, kids stopped doing it because they felt they were too old or too mature. So it was really targeted towards 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, right? And then once a kid hit a certain age, they didn't have to go trick-or-treating with their parents. They could just go with their buddies. Well, this is when they would abduct children. This isn't a coincidence that children were getting abducted more and more and more throughout the decades on Halloween night. And they can get away with it because the kids would go out on their own without their parents. They'd be in costumes, and people would scoop them up off the streets, and then that would be the human sacrifice. They would use them for human sacrifice and blood rituals. Okay, now we don't see it as much. I'm sure it still is very, very high, the rate of people that get abducted. But they don't need to target it as much. Then they needed the blood offerings and the blood sacrifices. And some of the times, or most of the times too, they had people in their covens who would offer up their own children, or who were specifically in those covens to give birth to kids who were specifically, the birth was done so that these children could be sacrificed, so they could do their blood rituals. But they also would go around abducting children if they didn't have someone there, a child there for the blood sacrifice on Halloween. And it was an easy way for them to do it, right? Because kids are running around in the streets. They don't have to break into someone's house. they could scoop them up off the streets because a lot of parents weren't, necessarily going trick-or-treating with their kids once they hit a certain age. And, kids want to go by themselves. They don't want to have their hand held by their parents when they're 10 years old or 12 years old. And it's true. I mean, even if it's a friendly development, they'd still be out on their own. And it was an easy way for them to abduct children. And that is a fact. And I know people say, well, that's not no origins to it. Well, it does have origins to it. That's why they market it towards young kids. That's why it's marketed towards little children. And like I said, it's not as rampant as it used to be because of the abortion sacrifices. Then they could obtain their blood rituals through that now. And they don't have as much of a hard time of getting children to sacrifice. So these are some of the origins of Halloween. There's some theories about some other things that could be incorporated into it as far as the blood sacrifices, even going back to the Romans and what they would do during the Halloween period. But it's a day of blood ritual and blood sacrifice. It is when the veil is the thinnest. And these are other examples of the traditions that go along with Halloween. I exposed Easter. Many people have exposed Easter when I first started my channel. All of these traditions that go on during these holidays, they're all pagan. They're all satanic. And the problem in America is people become so attached to the holidays that it's hard for them to separate it. They love the holidays more than they love, people will be more likely to separate from the television before the holidays because the holidays remind them of things when they were a kid. It's all part of the mind control. But these are all satanic holidays that are celebrated, the mainstream ones, Halloween, Easter, Christmas. They're all pagan at the core and satanic. And specifically Halloween, which is literally, Christmas is also a day of blood ritual for them. But Halloween is when the veil is its thinnest. It's very important for them this time period, very important. So again, these are the traditions that are around Halloween, involving the Druids, all these things that we see still around the year, right? We see the Wicker Man ceremony, the Burning Man ceremony, which is really the Wicker Man. And you could watch that movie if you're not understanding of what the Wicker Man is and how it's, they burn people and sacrifice them inside of the Wicker Man, inside of the quote unquote Burning Man. And these are the traditions around dressing up and the bobbing for apples and the trick or treating and what really matters to them at the core, which is the blood ritual sacrifice on that night, specifically of young children. And again, that's why, or one of the reasons it's marketed so heavily towards children is because they used to, for them, they could go around and scoop up kids during this period. So keep those things in mind. I wanted to point it out to everybody out there. I know there's a lot of people that don't understand Halloween. I know that there's some other beliefs to it regarding it. I'm not saying that those are wrong, but there's many things that tie into the Druids and the blood sacrifice. But the important thing to remember is that it is a satanic holiday, Samhain, as it's called, even though it's written Samhain. And it's important to remember that spiritual warfare is real. It's going on. I mentioned it in almost all my videos. But during these time periods, make sure that you're staying strong in your prayer and so you're not under demonic attack. They're protected from it because these people are performing these rituals and they're sending demonic attacks out towards Christians specifically. So stay strong in your faith, stay strong in the scriptures. I thank you for listening to today's show. God bless all of you and your families.